The gravel road that led to my farm wasn't just dirt and stone, it was my lifeline. Every morning before dawn, I'd take that narrow path down into town, load up supplies, and haul them back up the ridge where my family's land had stood for 3 generations. Cows needed feed, tools needed fuel, and sometimes an old man like me needed a cup of coffee and a conversation at the diner. That road was all I had, and that's why, the morning I found it blocked, I felt my heart hammer in a way it hadn't since I came back from the war. It wasn't construction. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Across the gravel, chained together like a fortress, were 3 concrete barricades. Freshly painted signs glared at me in bold red letters. Private road, no trespassing. My stomach sank. There was only one person who could have done this. Karen. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, you know the type. She wasn't elected. She seized her little empire by bullying, backroom deals, and endless complaints filed about violations. Her house wasn't near my farm, but the road that cut past her cul-de-sac gave her just enough leverage to cause me hell. And she did. She stood there that morning, smug in her lawn chair, sipping something out of a tumbler like she was queen of the county. "Sorry, Harold," she said with a voice that carried farther than it should have. "The HOA voted last night. This road's not yours anymore. Rules are rules." I clenched my jaw. "Karen, that road has been mine since before this HOA even existed." "My grandfather," she cut me off with a laugh. "Your grandfather didn't file the paperwork. This is HOA land now, and unless you want to rack up fines, you'll stay off it." The thing about people like Karen is they thrive on control. It wasn't about the road. It wasn't about the rules. It was about power, and she wanted me to bow. Neighbors peeked through curtains as I stood there. They knew she was wrong. They knew she was abusing the system, but no one said a word, because Karen had teeth and she knew how to use them. That night, I sat in my farmhouse staring at the maps my grandfather had left me. Legal deeds, old surveys, proof that the road belonged to us long before Karen was born. But in court, that paper meant little against the HOA's lawyers. I'd be buried in fees before I got justice. I could feel her shadow creeping over my farm. Without that road, I couldn't move livestock, couldn't sell crops, couldn't even get medical help in an emergency. Karen thought she had me cornered, but she didn't know me. Because when you block a man's only road, sometimes he digs another. And what started as a desperate plan to save my farm would turn into the one thing Karen never saw coming. The exposure of her corruption so deep, it would shatter the entire HOA. Before we go on, hit subscribe so stories like this reach you first. To understand how it got this bad, you need to know the history of that road and the woman who thought she could take it from me. My grandfather carved that gravel lane with his own hands in the late 1940s. Back then, there was no HOA, no subdivisions, no neatly trimmed lawns with matching mailboxes. Just farmland, wild country, and people who minded their own business. He cleared the brush, hauled stone from the creek bed, and built a path sturdy enough to haul cattle and wagons. Over time, it became the one and only artery connecting our farm to the outside world. The county knew it. The neighbors knew it. Everyone used to respect it. But then, about 20 years ago, the world around us changed. Developers came sniffing around, buying up cheap land, parceling it out, and building a shiny new neighborhood right at the base of our ridge. They pitched it as country living with modern convenience, but anyone with sense knew it was a cash grab. They threw up cookie-cutter houses, paved cul-de-sacs, and brought in an HOA to enforce rules that nobody who grew up here would have ever thought to care about. At first, it didn't affect me. Their roads were theirs. My road was mine, until Karen moved in. She wasn't from here. She came out of the city with a chip on her shoulder and a hunger for control. Within a year, she was volunteering on the HOA board. Within 2, she had taken it over entirely. The old folks who thought they'd signed up for a quiet life in the country suddenly found themselves being fined for leaving a trash can in the driveway, or for planting flowers that didn't match the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. People complained, sure. But Karen had an answer for everything, backed by thick binders of rules, bylaws, and fees. Some moved away. Some just kept their heads down. I kept my distance. I didn't care if she made people repaint their shutters or ban wind chimes. That was their fight. As long as she stayed off my land, we'd never cross paths. But Karen wasn't the type to stay in her lane. The trouble started small, Letters from the HOA claiming my farm equipment was unsightly when I drove it past the neighborhood. Warnings about noise complaints when I fired up tractors at dawn. Petty nonsense. I ignored it, but Karen didn't like being ignored. She escalated. One spring, I came home to find my fence line spray-painted with neon orange. HOA property. She'd marched surveyors out and claimed the road wasn't mine after all, that it fell within the neighborhood's jurisdiction. I laughed it off at first. Let her have her little power trip, I told myself. The law is the law, and the law is on my side. But here's the thing about HOAs. They don't fight fair. They bury you in paperwork, drag you into endless hearings, and bleed you dry with legal fees until you give up. And Karen was ruthless enough to push it all the way. Neighbors whispered that she had connections at the county office, maybe even in the courthouse. Complaints filed against her mysteriously vanished. Inspectors always seemed to show up when it benefited her. And somehow, the HOA's budget, which every homeowner paid into, kept ballooning while nothing ever improved. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my road. This was about corruption. Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was profiting. Blocking my road was her boldest move yet. But it wasn't just spite. I started to suspect she had a bigger plan. Developers had been sniffing around again, offering cash for more farmland to expand the neighborhood. If she cut me off, if she made my life miserable enough, maybe she thought I'd sell. Maybe she thought she could grab my land for pennies and flip it for millions. What she didn't know was that I'd die before I gave up this farm. But knowing the truth and proving it are two very different things. I called the county clerk's office. They gave me the runaround. I showed them my grandfather's deeds, the old surveys. They shrugged. The HOA filed new easement paperwork. It's tied up in court. You'll need a lawyer. Lawyer. That word stung. I'd seen neighbors crushed under legal fees just trying to stand up to Karen. Court wasn't an option. Not unless I wanted to lose everything in the process. I tried going to the sheriff, but even he looked uncomfortable. Harold, I know this road's been yours forever, but Karen's got papers that say otherwise. Until a judge rules on it, my hands are tied. So that was it. She had me boxed in. I spent nights pacing the farmhouse, maps and deeds spread across the table, lantern flickering as I tried to find a way out. The road was blocked. The courts were stacked. The sheriff was useless. That's when my eyes drifted to the old cellar door. Beneath the farmhouse was a root cellar my grandfather had dug by hand. Narrow, cramped, but sturdy as bedrock. As a boy, I used to play down there, pretending it was a bunker or a mine. Now, staring at it as a grown man, a crazy thought took root. If they blocked the road above, why not make one below? It sounded insane at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had tools. I had time. And most importantly, I had no other choice. Karen thought she'd cornered me. What she didn't realize was that desperate men don't quit. They dig. And so, late one night, when the neighborhood lights were out, and Karen was probably patrolling her cul-de-sac with binoculars, I carried a pickaxe down into the cellar and struck the first blow of what would become the tunnel that changed everything. The first strike of the pickaxe echoed through the cellar like a gunshot. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and for a second I wondered if I'd lost my mind. Digging a tunnel at my age? Through rocky soil? To outsmart a woman backed by lawyers and money? But then I thought about my grandfather, how he dug that original road by hand with nothing but a mule and determination. If he could carve a path through wilderness, I could carve one under Karen's empire. The work started slow. I waited until nightfall every day. While the neighborhood above me slept, I chipped away at the earth, hauling buckets of dirt up the cellar stairs and dumping them into the old compost pit behind the barn. At first, the tunnel was just a narrow crawl space, barely wide enough for me to wriggle through, but inch by inch, night by night, it grew. I kept maps on the table upstairs, carefully measuring the distance between my cellar and the woods beyond Karen's barricade. If I could tunnel far enough to break through the ridge behind her cul-de-sac, I'd have a hidden exit, a way to haul supplies in and out without ever touching that blocked road. Still, as much as the tunnel was a lifeline, it was also a secret weapon, because if I pulled this off, Karen wouldn't just lose her leverage, she'd lose the whole game. But Karen wasn't sitting still either. Every few days, I found new signs hammered into the barricade. Trespassers will be fined. Sometimes she added cameras on poles, Little plastic eyes pointed toward my farm. Whether they actually worked or not, I couldn't tell, but it made my skin crawl. She wanted me to feel watched, powerless, caged in my own land. And she didn't stop there. One afternoon I came home from town to find a bright yellow flyer nailed to my barn. It was an HOA notice of violation, claiming my property had become a public nuisance. The language was ridiculous. Overgrown fields, they were hay crops. Abandoned vehicles, they were tractors. Noise disturbances, I'd run a generator. At the bottom was a fine $500 payable to the HOA. I laughed out loud. The arrogance, the gall. But behind that laugh was a knot of fear. If Karen could invent violations out of thin air, how long before she tried to seize the land itself? That night I dug harder. Sweat stung my eyes, dirt caked my fingernails, but every strike of the pickaxe felt like rebellion. Weeks passed. My arms grew stronger. The tunnel stretched longer. I reinforced it with timber from old fence posts, making crude supports to keep the ceiling from caving. The deeper I dug, the quieter the world above seemed. Down there, I wasn't under Karen's rules. Down there, it was just me and the earth and the steady rhythm of digging. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. One evening, as I hauled another load of dirt to the compost pit, I spotted something glinting near the barricade. A small drone hovering low, its camera eye blinking red. Karen had upgraded her surveillance. I ducked into the shadows, heart racing. If she saw me hauling dirt every night, she'd know something was up. She'd never imagine a tunnel, but she'd suspect something, and Karen didn't need much to unleash hell. The next morning, I drove into town and bought 2 old tarps from the hardware store. That night, I stretched them over the compost pit, tossing hay and scrap wood on top to make it look like nothing but farm clutter. From then on, I only hauled dirt out when the moon was dark, moving like a ghost across the yard. Karen wasn't going to catch me, not yet. The tunnel grew long enough that I could finally crouch walk through parts of it. The air grew damp, the soil cooler. I knew I was getting closer to the ridge. I marked progress with notches on the wall, like a prisoner counting days. Each notch meant freedom, but the deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. One night, as I swung the pickaxe, the ceiling groaned. A chunk of earth collapsed inches from my head, spraying me with dirt. I coughed, heart hammering. If that ceiling gave way, no one would find me. I'd vanish under the soil. Just another secret Karen never knew. That was the first time doubt crept in. What if this was madness? What if Karen had already won and I was just digging myself an early grave? Then I remembered her face the morning she blocked the road. That smug smirk, that glint in her eye when she thought she'd beaten me. That memory lit a fire in my chest. I wasn't digging a grave. I was digging justice. Meanwhile, Karen kept tightening her grip. Neighbors started whispering to me at the feed store. She's raising HOA dues again. She fined my kid for parking on the street overnight. She threatened to tow my truck if I don't repaint my fence. Everyone hated her, but nobody dared speak up. The HOA had become a dictatorship, and Karen was its queen. One neighbor, an older man named Bill, leaned in close one afternoon and muttered, "You know she's skimming, right? Those dues aren't going to improvements. She's lining her pockets." That confirmed what I already suspected. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was corrupt, and if I could prove it, that's when the plan shifted. The tunnel wasn't just about escaping her blockade anymore. It was about exposing her. As the tunnel neared completion, I started sneaking into the woods near her cul-de-sac, watching her house from a distance. It was always lit up, even late at night. She held HOA meetings there, but neighbors whispered they were more like parties for her friends. Expensive cars came and went. People in suits carried briefcases inside. Something was happening behind those walls, something bigger than overzealous HOA rules. One night, I saw her drag 2 heavy boxes from her SUV into the garage. Later, she came out with nothing but a purse. That's when it hit me. What if the tunnel didn't just lead around her blockade? But under her house, the thought was wild, dangerous, maybe impossible. But if those boxes were what I thought they were, records, money, proof, then the only way to get it was from the shadows. The tunnel stretched on, curving deeper under the ridge. I adjusted my maps, recalculated my bearings, and aimed the dig toward the edge of her property. Every strike of the pickaxe carried the weight of a new mission. I wasn't just digging for myself anymore. I was digging for everyone Karen had bullied, fined, and crushed. And soon, very soon, She was going to find out that the road she blocked wasn't the only path a man could take. Because beneath her feet, justice was coming. The night the tunnel broke through, I knew there was no turning back. For weeks, I'd been digging by lantern light, measuring each strike, each inch, until the soil above thinned. When my pick finally cracked into open air, I found myself staring up through a gap into the concrete foundation of Karen's garage. It was almost poetic. She thought she had sealed me off. Yet here I was, crawling under her fortress like a ghost rising from the earth. At first, I only listened. Through the cracks in the foundation, I could hear voices, Karen's sharp nasal tone and the deeper rumble of men who didn't sound like neighbors. Papers shuffled, money counted. My suspicion was right. Her garage wasn't just storage, it was her vault. One night I heard her brag, "They'll never trace it back to me. All those fines, all those dues, they think it goes to landscaping and trash pickup. Meanwhile, I've got 20 grand right here." My pulse hammered. Proof. I went back down into the tunnel, mind racing. Sneaking in was risky, too risky. But exposing her required evidence, and there it was, sitting in boxes just feet above my head. The next night, I made my move. I crawled through the tunnel, heart pounding, and pushed up a loose patch of concrete I'd been working on for days. It gave way silently, leaving me just enough room to slip into the corner of her garage. The air smelled of gasoline and fresh paint. Boxes were stacked waist-high against the wall, labeled with neat handwriting, HOA records. I opened one. Inside weren't records at all, but wads of cash bound with rubber bands, stuffed alongside fake invoices. Landscaping bills, security fees, numbers that didn't match reality. She'd been laundering money right under everyone's nose. I snapped photos with my old flip phone. The camera was grainy, but the evidence was undeniable. Cash. Forged papers. Everything I needed. Then I heard it, the slam of a car door. Karen was home. I froze, heart hammering in my chest as her heels clicked across the driveway and the garage door began to rise. The light from outside spilled in, catching the dust on my boots. "No time to run!" I ducked behind a stack of boxes just as the door shut again. Karen hummed to herself, rifling through a box. "Where is it? Where?" She cursed under her breath. "Ah, there." I dared a glance. She was pulling out envelopes, thick with cash, stuffing them into her purse. She didn't notice the loose concrete panel. She didn't notice the dirt on the floor. She didn't notice me, crouched just feet away, phone clenched in my hand. When she finally left, slamming the door behind her, I didn't breathe until the engine of her SUV faded into the distance. Only then did I crawl back into the tunnel, dragging one of the forged invoices with me. I had what I needed, but exposing her wasn't as simple as showing the sheriff. If she had half the connections people whispered about, she'd bury the evidence before it saw daylight. I needed leverage, public leverage. So I set a trap. The next week, the HOA announced a special meeting at the community center, mandatory attendance. Karen loved her theatrics, and she loved parading her authority in front of the whole neighborhood. I showed up early, box in hand. When Karen strutted to the front of the room, clipboard under her arm, the air was thick with tension. She launched into her usual speech about rising dues, necessary fines, and upcoming improvements. That's when I stood up. "Funny thing, Karen," I said loudly, holding up the invoice I'd taken. "You say the money's going to improvements. But I checked this one. It's for landscaping. $10,000. Problem is..." I paused, turning the paper toward the crowd. "The company doesn't exist." Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's smile faltered. "That's a lie," she snapped. "Sit down, Harold. You're trespassing." I ignored her and pulled out my phone. "I've got photos too. Boxes of cash in your garage. Fake invoices. You've been skimming off every single one of these people for years." The murmurs turned into shouts. Neighbors who'd stayed quiet for years were suddenly awake, furious. "Is that true? She's been stealing from us?" Karen's face went red. "Don't listen to him. He's a bitter old man. He hates progress. But her words drowned under the voices of the crowd. People surged forward, demanding answers, demanding proof. I handed the invoice to Bill, the old neighbor who'd once warned me. His hands shook as he read it. "This is fraud," he said. "This is theft." Karen tried to grab the paper, but someone blocked her. Phones flashed as neighbors snapped photos, recording every second. Karen wasn't just facing me anymore. She was facing everyone. And for the first time, she looked afraid. By the time the sheriff arrived, summoned not by Karen, but by a dozen furious homeowners, she was cornered. I handed him the photos, the invoice, and told him where to look. He didn't argue this time. He didn't shrug me off. He just nodded grimly and said, "We'll investigate." Karen sputtered, shrieking about conspiracies and lies, but no one listened. Her empire had crumbled in minutes. As the sheriff led her out, neighbors turned to me. Some clapped me on the back. Some whispered thank you. Some just stared, shaking their heads in disbelief. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who had dug himself out of a grave someone else tried to bury him in. And for the first time in months, I knew the road home was mine again. The night after Karen was led out in handcuffs, the neighborhood felt different. For months, maybe years, she had been the loudest voice in every room. She controlled the HOA like a queen sitting on a throne of rules, fines, and petty grudges. Without her, the silence was almost surreal. But the silence didn't last long. The very next morning, trucks rolled up to her house. Deputies carted out box after box, documents, cash, even electronics. Every neighbor peeked from behind curtains, some whispering, some bold enough to stand on the sidewalk and watch. The empire of HOA Karen was being dismantled in broad daylight. I stayed on my porch, arms crossed, watching it unfold. I didn't need to gloat. The truth was loud enough. Within a week, the sheriff's office confirmed what I'd uncovered. Karen had been embezzling HOA funds for years. She funneled thousands into fake companies, pocketing the cash, and even used fines against homeowners as her personal piggy bank. But it went deeper than money. She'd been laundering cash from a local contractor known for shady dealings, which explained the strange men I'd overheard in her garage. It wasn't just corruption, it was organized fraud. The county pressed charges: felony fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Her trial would make headlines for months. And just like that, the woman who once towered over the neighborhood with her smug grin and iron grip was reduced to a mugshot on the evening news. Of course, the HOA itself didn't survive the scandal. The board members tried to distance themselves, claiming ignorance, but too many questions remained. How did you not notice tens of thousands missing? Why did you let her run unchecked for so long? The anger of the community boiled over. Neighbors who had once been afraid to speak now demanded accountability. Meetings turned into shouting matches until finally the board dissolved under pressure. The county stepped in to oversee finances, freezing accounts until everything could be audited. For the first time in years, the homeowners weren't under Karen's thumb. It was messy. It was chaotic. But it was also freedom. For me, the biggest change came quietly. 2 weeks after the raid, county workers showed up at the barricade blocking my road. Without Karen's interference, there was nothing stopping them. I stood there, hands on my hips, as the concrete blocks were lifted away and the dirt scraped clean. When the last barrier was gone, I drove my old truck down the familiar path, dust trailing in the sun. It was just a road, but it felt like reclaiming a part of myself that Karen had tried to bury. I rolled down the window, the scent of pine and earth filling the cab, and laughed. A raw, unrestrained laugh. The farm was mine again. Not just physically, but spiritually. Something unexpected happened in the weeks that followed. The same neighbors who once ignored me, or worse, sided with Karen, began to stop by. Some brought pies. Others offered help repairing fences or clearing brush. They apologized, not always with words, but with actions. Bill, the old man who'd once warned me Karen was dangerous, stood beside me one evening as the sun dipped low. "You did what none of us could," he said quietly. "You stood up to her. You exposed her. That took guts," I shrugged. "It just took a tunnel." He chuckled, but his eyes were serious. "You gave us back our voice. Don't think we don't know that." When Karen's trial began, it drew crowds. Reporters, curious onlookers, even former neighbors who wanted to see justice done. I attended the first day. She walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair unkempt, the smug smile gone. She looked smaller somehow, fragile even, but I felt no pity. The prosecutor laid out the evidence, the fake invoices, the laundered money, the testimonies of neighbors who had been extorted. My photos of the cash-filled boxes were projected on a screen for all to see. Karen avoided my eyes the entire time. By the second week, her defense collapsed. Too much proof. Too many witnesses. She struck a deal to reduce her sentence, but prison was inevitable. The woman who once bullied and terrorized her neighbors would now spend years behind bars. The victory didn't come without scars. The tunnel I'd dug still stretched under the ground, a reminder of the lengths I'd gone to fight back. My hands bore calluses that wouldn't fade. My back still ached from nights hunched over in the dirt. Sometimes I wondered if I'd gone too far, if sneaking into her garage had crossed a line. But then I remembered the nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd lose everything I'd worked for because of one vindictive woman. I remembered the fear of being trapped, cut off, powerless. The tunnel wasn't just an escape, it was survival. And survival, I realized, doesn't always look noble. Sometimes it looks like dirt under your nails and mud on your boots. As months passed, the neighborhood began to heal. Without Karen's iron grip, the tension lifted. Barbecues replaced board meetings. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years found themselves laughing together again. There was no more talk of excessive fines or invasive rules. People planted gardens without fear of violations. Kids rode bikes without Karen's scolding voice chasing them down the street. For the first time in years, it felt like a community, not a dictatorship. I never filled the tunnel in. Some might call it paranoia, others practicality. For me, it was symbolic. A reminder that when someone tries to trap you, there's always another way out, even if you have to dig it yourself. Sometimes I walk down there with a lantern, brushing my hand against the cool earth. It feels like a secret between me and the land, a scar that turned into strength. If the neighbors ever asked about it, I'd just smile and say, it's part of the story, because it was. Word of Karen's downfall spread far beyond our community. Local news stations ran segments about HOA abuse and corruption. Online forums buzzed with debates about power, control, and what homeowners should do when the system turns against them. I started receiving letters, some from people in other towns, even other states, sharing their own battles with HOAs. Some thanked me for standing up, others asked for advice. I realized Karen's story wasn't just mine. It was part of a larger struggle people faced across the country. One man wrote, "Reading about what you did gave me the courage to challenge my HOA. I didn't dig a tunnel, but I did find the paper trail, and now we're cleaning house." That letter meant more to me than I can explain. On a quiet evening, months after Karen's sentencing, I sat on my porch watching the sunset. The field stretched golden before me, the road clear and open. I thought about how close I'd come to losing it all. How one person's pettiness, greed, and lust for power had almost buried me. But in the end, the land was still mine. The road was still mine. My dignity was still mine. Karen tried to block me out, but all she did was teach me how to dig deeper. Into the earth, into myself, and into the truth. And the truth, once uncovered, can never be buried again.